National Assembly on Wednesday approved President Bola Tinubu's request to borrow 1.15 trillion naira from the domestic debt market just to help finance the 2025 budget deficit. While President Tinubu said that the debt will be used for the implementation of government programs and projects under the 2025 fiscal plan, while critics are warning that continued borrowing could actually push the country towards unsustainable debt levels. Government officials and lawmakers insist that strategic loans remain vital for financing infrastructure, sustaining growth, and maintaining investor confidence. But the question that is now on the lips of many Nigerians is, how and when will these debts be repaid? So tonight, Babajide Ogunsanwo, who's the founder of Leadership by Data and Channels Television's data analyst, is here to share more facts and vital insight on Nigeria's debt profile. Thank you very much, Babajide, for joining us on the news at 10.
Good evening.
And what is the actual state of government finances so far this year?
It just depends on what perspective you want to look at it. But if we want to look at and stick to the facts, the state of government finances will be that 7-letter word, unclear. Now, why would I call this and describe this as unclear? For 3 reasons. The first is, if you look at all the public records, we still do not have any official documents on the budget implementation scorecard or report for this year. So in simple terms, we're about to get to the end of 2025, and there's absolutely no public record on what is the situation of the budget as of today in terms of the budget execution report. So you go to the official website of the Federal Ministry of Budget and Planning, you look at the CBN's documents, you look at the National Planning Commission's documents, absolutely quiet on the state of the 2025 budget. That's the first reason. The second reason is we still do not have sufficient evidence that the returns on these debts is higher and outweighs the cost of the debt. And so as long as the cost of the debt is higher than the returns of the debt, we will be in a vicious cycle. In simple terms, what I mean is, Anne, if you go to the bank and you get a loan for 100 million naira, whatever it is, for instance, 30% per annum, and you move those monies into a project that just gives you a 10% return per annum, what has happened is the cost of your debt is significantly higher than the returns you're getting on the debt. Bad business. So we need to ask ourselves, is there sufficient evidence that the way and the returns and the results and the impact of this debt is higher than the cost we're paying for the debt? Now, the third reason why I describe the state of finances as unclear is that looking at all the information we have today, it shows that we are even getting more problems in the accuracy of our forecast. What I mean is our forecast in budgeting is significantly inaccurate. Let's take a look at what I mean. And if we take a look at that evidence from the central bank, first half of last year, looking at first half of last year, the budget for revenue for the federal government was 3.2 trillion naira. What was the actual? 2.4 trillion naira. So for the first half of last year, we'll look at the forecasting accuracy on government revenue of 68%. But look at what's happened this year. Even though we still don't have information for most of the second half of the year, the CBN tells us that first half of the year, the federal government's actual revenue, 3.1 trillion naira. However, the budget, the plan, based on all its assumptions, the plan was that first half of this year, the federal government will earn a revenue of 8.2 trillion naira. So it simply means that we are currently at just about 38% of our actual budget. So we can clearly see that last year, this year, the trend is downwards on how accurate are we forecasting. And that's a big problem, because if we're not planning well, then how will we execute well?
Well, Babajide, just 2 weeks ago, the National Assembly approved another presidential request, an external borrowing package worth $2.847 billion. Is Nigeria in a debt trap?
Perhaps we don't use the word debt trap, but we are facing significant challenges. Some good news and bad news. Now, the good news is these numbers that we are hearing, both the external borrowing and the domestic borrowing, are not new borrowings. They were part of what the president had planned to do. So what it was before, it was that we were at the planning stage. It was, this is what I intend to do. And then there was some noise. But now it is going into actual. So we're now moving from potential to actual. So we're at the state where these monies are going to be borrowed. So, but it is not new borrowings. It had always been the intention. So good news is that this isn't new borrowings. The bad news, Anne, is that our debt service is higher than even our revenue. So let's take a look at what I mean. And if we take a look at the facts from the Central Bank of Nigeria, looking at what happened in the first half of last year and the first half of this year, first half of last year, the evidence shows that the federal government earned a revenue of 2.2 trillion naira, first half of last year. However, debt service in excess of 6.7 trillion naira. What it means is that the amount we are even using to service the debt is more than the amount we are earning. Did that change in the first half of this year? The answer is no. The central bank makes it clear. First half of this year, yes, revenue has grown. However, debt service has also grown. So right now, first half of this year, federal government's revenue, 3.1 trillion naira. However, how much is it paying on debt? Or how much has it paid on debt this year? 7.5 trillion naira. So the position is, revenue is growing, but debt is growing, and the amount of money we are using to service our debt is more than the amount of money we are earning. As we'll say, as the common man will say, shaking up. That is the fact.
But from where you're sitting, Babajide, looking at the future, what is the public debt looking like for the Nigerian government?
And we can look at it from different perspectives, but if we are really to stick to the facts, going by our trends, we will most likely be hitting 100 trillion naira domestic debt just as we're going into 2027. Let's look at these facts. These are not Babajide's facts. These are facts by the Debt Management Office, the Central Bank, and independent numbers that are publicly available. What we are doing is to analyze it and then be able to draw the insights. And if we take a look at even these trends within this decade, we can see the concerns. The evidence shows that what President Buhari did with the domestic debt in his last 2 years in office is what President Tinubu has done in his first 2 years. What do I mean? As of 2021, the evidence from the DMO shows that domestic debt, 17.6 trillion naira as of the second quarter of 2021. As at the second quarter of 2023, that had grown by about 30 trillion naira to 48.31 trillion naira. Statement of fact, domestic debt had grown by 30 trillion naira from the second quarter of 2021 to the second quarter of 2023. Now, what has happened between the second quarter of 2023 to the second quarter of 2025? The DMO says it has also grown by an additional 30 trillion naira. So from 48 trillion naira, we are now almost at 78 trillion naira. So that's why I said that from the domestic perspective, the evidence shows that the last 2 years of President Buhari, domestic debt grew by 30 trillion naira approximately. The first 2 years of President Tinubu, domestic debt has also grown by approximately 30 trillion naira. The difference is what we see is that President Tinubu is slowing down on the growth of external debt. So we can clearly see external debt between 2021 to 2023 moved from $28 billion to $38 billion. Right now, that's now about $42 billion. So the President Tinubu seems to be more focused on just keeping the borrowings because we're not earning revenue, the government wants to spend. So it really might not be a debt trap, but perhaps what we'll call a vicious cycle. Like I said, we're approaching 100 trillion naira in domestic debt for the federal government based on these trends. The concerns are the same concerns shared by the World Bank, and poverty is rising. So the question we need to ask ourselves really is, are we getting more for this debt, or are we getting less for the debt? And
thank you very much, Babajide Okuso, founder of Leadership by Data, and of course Channels Television's Chief Data Analyst, for your exciting insight on the news at 10.
And we'll keep watching the football match, hoping that we'll probably get out of this
We do hope. Maybe that's
situation we are in.